going to be physical. So are we.
It's Hate Week.
It will be an emotional game, but I don't get emotional about it.
We'll dive into Georgia Tech, and Mike weighs in on how the SEC championship runs through the G. Let's kick it off.
Giving you the insider takes and the big picture view on the Dogs. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingles with DawgNation insider Mike Griffith and Cody Chaffins.
And welcome into On the Beat. I'm Cody Chaffins alongside Mike Griffith. And Mike, I can't tell you how excited I am that we are not doing a show about signing day or who we can get out of the transfer portal or how we can worm our way into the playoff. No, Georgia's still alive and a part of this thing. 2 weeks ago, I asked you, was Georgia doing it wrong? Clearly, looking at the rest of the SEC, they're doing something right.
Maybe Coach Kirby Smart's best job, Cody. When you look at everything that's happened to Georgia this year, and you wake up on a Sunday morning and there's the Bulldogs in the SEC championship game, and there they are, back in the top of the ratings where they could host a first round game, or if they win the SEC championship, perhaps even get a first round bye. And to have the team positioned like they're positioned right now, it kind of puts everything into perspective. I know there's hemming and hawing about, well, the defense didn't do this against UMass, or, well, they had that bad game, quote unquote, bad game against Ole Miss. But at the end of the day, here's Kirby and here's Georgia. What did he say a couple years ago? We ain't going nowhere. Kirby and Georgia ain't going nowhere. Here they are.
Yeah, we'll talk more about the UMass game coming up. Of course, we'll dive into Georgia Tech as well. But I do want to kind of start off, Kirby Smart every week, it almost gets cliche to us where he's like, we want to be this and we don't want to be the highs and lows. But darn if he's not making sense. And look where Georgia is compared to where everybody else, Georgia doesn't lose those road, games to teams that, with 500 records.
No, they take care of business. I mean, and clearly Ole Miss and Alabama were very special teams on the nights that they played them. It was a big game. But Georgia got it done at Texas. What a valuable road win that's proving to be. And I'll say this. I think Georgia wants Texas. I know we're going to talk more about that later in the show, but I think that's who they want to play. And when I say that's who they want, I don't mean Kirby's out there saying that's who I want. I mean, as I look at the potential matchups and ramifications, I think the ideal situation for the Dogs, I mean, obviously they got to take care of business against Tech, but I think the ideal situation is to play Texas.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the SEC championship. Lane Kiffin, one thing Kirby Smart also does right is he doesn't put his foot in his mouth. So at no point did he go out and say, hey, we don't want to play in that game, right? Never did that like Lane Kiffin, who, doesn't have to worry about it now. But, what is it about Kirby Smart that, A, he doesn't do stuff like that, and then he has his team kind of sitting in the catbird seat here and looking, just kind of getting to wait on Texas or Texas A&M?
Well, he told us. I mean, he's calculated. So first of all, Kirby addressed the playoffs and the format at the right time, which was on the front end. And he said, hey, looking at this deal, whoever loses the SEC championship game is going to have a pretty quick turnaround, and we don't know how the committee is going to treat them. So he said that long ago, didn't say that recently. He's very focused on Georgia Tech, made that very clear today. The other thing that Kirby does so effectively, and remember, he said this, you don't ride the wave of emotion. He wants that team to ascend. He wants to stay steady. The game is played with emotion, but you don't get emotional. And Kirby is a cool cat. He's very calculated. He picks his moments. Now, that's not to sound silent, doesn't get excited and motivated for his guys. But I mean, in terms of how he manages this team, Georgia has been a very steady team. They're a very poised football team. And when you're poised like that, that enables you to handle those ups and downs better because you keep it on a plane. You don't get too excited when you win the big games. You don't get too down when you lose some games. You stay on task and you stay the course. And that's what Georgia does so effectively. And that's why they've remained at the top of the nation.
All right, so Georgia now in their 7th SEC championship game of the last 8. 4-7 all-time in SEC championship games, so not a great record in that game. But, you said Georgia wants Texas. It's going to be Texas or Texas A&M. Why do you think Georgia wants Texas again?
Well, number one, I think it's a better matchup, right? I think Sarkisian is a very good coach, but Kirby knows him inside and out. And yeah, there's a little bit of a revenge factor there. So you might say, well, that works against you. Maybe a little bit. But in terms of the matchup and what Texas tries to do, they don't have that mobile quarterback. Now, Ewers has some mobility and Manning has some mobility, but these guys aren't going to kill you with their feet. I don't think their receivers are elite. And if you look at their schedule, it's questionable. I don't know how good Texas really is. Are they good enough to get by A&M? Maybe, right? That game is at A&M, though. Remember that. I also think there's some human nature involved here. If it's a one-loss Texas team that's playing in that game, let's be real. They could lose the SEC championship game and be pretty darn confident that they're still going to get in the playoff with 2 losses. They're not going to drop out of the top 10. A&M, however, you get a desperate team. They got nothing to lose. Backs against the wall. They'll have just beaten Texas. There'll be some momentum. They have a very mobile quarterback. They're very strong at the line of scrimmage. So I think it's a more difficult matchup. I think it's a more desperate team. I think Kirby knows all the coaches, but I don't think he knows him as well as he knows Sarkisian. It's a whole new situation, a whole new talent package, and a lot more things that are out there. Whereas I feel like Texas is a more familiar opponent. And when you put apples to apples and familiarity, I'm going to take Kirby to outcoach darn near anybody. So I think it's a better matchup. And then point 2, ramifications. If you were to lose the SEC championship game, if you lost it to the number 2 team in the country that you had already beaten on the road, I think there's a less chance of being penalized and falling out of the playoffs as a 3-loss team than if you were to lose to an A&M team that had just lost to Auburn 2 weeks before and isn't ranked as high. So for those 2 reasons, 1, I think Texas is a better matchup, and 2, I think it would be a more favorable situation in the event that Georgia were to lose in the SEC championship game in terms of the team making the college football playoff.
Yeah, Marcel Reed, running quarterback for Texas A&M. I think, Georgia would rather not face a running quarterback. I think your whole argument is really well said, but we're in this kind of weird moment. Do you feel like Georgia, at any point, there was disappointment that you have to go to Atlanta and play this extra game? Do you feel like there's any of that coming from this team?
No, because that's, again, not an emotional team, a very steady team. You put an object in Kirby's path, he's not going to complain about it. He's going to deal with it. He doesn't waste his breath on trying to change things that are out of his control. We saw that with NIL. We saw that with transfer portal. We've seen that with circumstance. It's wasted energy and effort to complain or not embrace whatever the challenge is. You go right at that challenge. If you're going to put the SEC championship in front of them, yes, it's a challenge, but that's not how they're going to look at it. They're going to look at it as an opportunity. Hey, guys, here's your chance to win an SEC championship. We didn't think it was going to happen, but all these things have fallen into place, and now there's an opportunity to emerge from this season as SEC champions and get a first-round bye. But again, none of this is going through their minds right now, Cody, because let me tell you, Georgia Tech, and I don't know how many times Kirby said the word physical today, probably close to 50. He knows what they're in for. This Yellow Jacket team is coming in with a stinger, man. They want to beat Georgia's ass. And they don't want to just beat them. They want to beat them that bad. This is a hungry team. This is a capable team that beat the Miami Hurricanes, the number 1 offense in the country, played Georgia Tech and lost. This team is capable of beating Georgia. Make no mistake about it. They're going to be physical. They're going to be chippy. They want this more than anything on their resume. This game means more to Georgia Tech than any game those kids have ever played in their lives. This game means more to Brent Key than any game he has played or coached in his life. They're going to leave it all on the field, and Kirby knows that, and his guys have got to be ready for that. If they're a little bit off, this game is going to be real close. It's going to be real tight, and if they lose to Georgia Tech, yeah, they can still get in by winning, but you lose any chance, you lose any mulligan, you lose to Georgia Tech, you lose the SEC title game, you're out. You don't get the benefit of the doubt. They have to win this football game to give themselves the best opportunity to make the college football playoff. And beyond that, there's now recruiting ramifications. Georgia Tech's got money. They're going, Kirby said it today, they're going after the same guys Georgia is. This is a competitor. This isn't just a little ACC team you're going to slap down and they're going to get your leftovers on the trail. They're going to go into living rooms and tell everybody they've arrived and they've beat Georgia. And they're going to take some kids from you if they win this game. So there is a lot at stake in this Georgia Tech, much more than there's been in maybe arguably ever the way these college football playoffs are set up.
I totally agree with you. And that Georgia Tech team, like you talked about, this is a team they've always wanted to beat Georgia, but I think this is a team that thinks they can beat Georgia maybe for the first time in a long time, and Brent Key feels that way as well. You talked about, get the Buster Faulkner, tie in there where he wants to beat his old team. And you got some, obviously coaches on both sides who have switched. Josh Crawford now on the Georgia staff, who was on Georgia Tech. But I do think this is a motivated Tech team who wasn't afraid after NC State already go out and put it to hell with Georgia out there, which you better believe is playing over and over in the weight room this week for those Georgia players to get them motivated.
Aaron Philo, the quarterback, the mobile quarterback. I mean, this kid played at Prince Avenue right down the street. He knows all about Georgia. He's got the Vandergrift family behind him. I mean, John Rick, Mark's son, was his offensive coordinator. I mean, this is a team that is so familiar with Georgia and wants Georgia so bad. This is such a dangerous game, and I know it's probably a topic for another show, but I have said 100 times since I've been on this beat, this does not need to be the last game of the year. This needs to be the first game of the year. This does not need to be a home and home. You're building up your competition. It makes no sense to me. Just like LSU dropped Tulane a long time ago, this should not be a home and home, especially now that Georgia Tech is moving the game to the Benz where they're going to make an extra $10 million. And what are they going to do with that money? They're going to put it in somebody's pocket that would have been playing at Georgia otherwise. So this game really needs a hard look. I know there's a lot of tradition there, Cody, but as the model changes, as college football changes, you have to change your business model to give your program the best opportunity to win championships. And putting money in Georgia Tech's pocket and playing them every other year at their place does not help your program, in my opinion. Now, tradition comes at a cost. You say, well, we really like this game. Well, you do, but do you want to win championships? Because you got to look real hard at what you're doing to your in-state rival and how you're helping them by giving them that home and home and by playing them the week before the SEC championship. We already have said it, and Kirby has said it, physical football, very, very physical football game. There will be some attrition. I can tell you right now, I can't tell you which dog's going to go down on the turf, but somebody's going down. And we've seen it time and time. DeAndre Swift suffered a shoulder injury in this game. George Pickens got ejected. They had no shot to beat LSU in 2019 with those two players out for the first half and injured. Every year, somebody's going to get stung. There's going to be a bump or a bruise. And then the next week, you got to line up against the best team in the SEC or the second best team in the SEC. That is a tall order. That is a tall task to play a blood rivalry like this the week before the SEC championship game, which will determine your playoff future.
I totally agree that maybe you could move the game around. I would hate to see this game canceled. I think, and you don't want to be the team who says, hey, we don't want to play this game anymore. Although I do agree with you. It does benefit Georgia Tech. It's only losses for Georgia. Like if they lose, there's nothing they're really gaining out of this other than, do you want to play an SEC team the week before you play the SEC championship game? You got to keep that in mind as well. I don't really want to be going on the road to Ole Miss the week before the SEC championship, which if you change it around.
South Carolina. I mean, there's other teams right now. Maybe South Carolina is not the best example, but honestly, I think Georgia would fare better against. I mean, it's not the same for South Carolina. It's not the same for Kentucky or Mississippi State or Arkansas or – to me, it's not about canceling the rivalry. I want to be clear on that. It's about canceling the home and home aspect of it. Play them here. If they want to play here every other year, or if you want to play there once every 4 years. But this game comes at a cost. This could be a home and home. I mean, we've already seen that the SEC is in talks with the Big Ten. And in the back of our minds, we're thinking this could be like a challenge series thing, right? We see the SEC, ACC basketball challenge. Why couldn't there be one weekend when SEC play Big Ten teams? That's kind of where my mind goes a little bit. That's going to come at a cost, or some of the aggressive scheduling you've seen Georgia make out of conference for home and homes, right? You still play Tech, but maybe you play them every other year at home, or maybe once out of 4 years you play at their place. You get to decide it's on your terms. Because like you just said, this game really doesn't benefit Georgia. It's a no-win proposition. If you win, you're supposed to win. If they stink, you don't get any credit for it whatsoever, and you don't get any interest out of state, and you don't get any recruits. If they get good, now they're competing with you and they're taking your players. So there's really not a good scenario for this game to really fit in anymore. Now, if they were in the SEC, that's fine. But a while back, Georgia Tech decided they didn't want this smoke, and they backed out. They got out. They got out while the getting was good. They don't want to play in this league. So why are you giving them the benefit of a home and home with a national championship program like Georgia. It's just as crazy as if all of a sudden LSU said, we want to play Tulane home and home. They'll never go back to that. It doesn't help LSU. Being the SEC powerhouse is a card that you have. Why do you want to share that and put revenue in your major rival's pocket? So this is a business decision that's going to be made at 10,000 feet, way above our pay grade. But it's something I think you really have to look at and consider when you think what is the most effective business model for Georgia football to maintain a championship contender status year in and year out.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. And that, it'll be decisions for Josh Brooks. Now, this game is going to be played on Friday night. And you talked about this is going to be a Georgia Tech team that comes in physical. Kirby Smart mentioned that 7 or 8 times in his press conference today, how physical it's going to be. But he also said Saturday after the game against UMass that UMass brought the fight to Georgia. Anything about that game worry you a bit after Georgia kind of came out flat?
No, because when I talked with Mississippi State coach Jeff Lebby, he said UMass was going to be physical. He said that these guys are going to show up. They're going to be physical. Those are tough kids. They got nothing to lose. They get to play in an arena like Sanford Stadium. They have all the reason to be jacked up. Georgia, conversely, it's kind of a sandwich game. You got Tech the next week. You know, you're coming off another win. They see UMass's 2-8 record. There's just some human nature there. Early start game, not surprising at all. It was good to see the guys that got in and performed, I thought, really well. Again, it was bad to see, Christian go down with an injury, although it sounds like he'll be back, but we don't know to what extent his injury is right now. I think Georgia did enough. They won by enough points. They faced some adversity. They got some things to correct. They got a lot of kids into play. But no, there's no concern. I mean, that was kind of predictable. I think Brandon Adams said on the Go with the Flow show, I don't know that Georgia's ever won as more than a 26-point home favorite. There's some numbers out there that, when Georgia's a big favorite, they don't cover at home. Kirby's not that run-it-up guy. He's going to take the opportunity to play a lot of guys because they want to keep them in the program. And you've got a lot of talented guys that are 2s and 3s that have been working hard, and you want them to stick around. So you need to get them in games like this. And I think that Georgia was able to do that.
Yeah, that was the only thing that may have stuck out to me is that Kirby Smart did say afterwards he wished they would have. He challenged his players, he said, to play to the standard for your teammates. So they're going to be able to get on the field maybe for a lot more earlier in the third quarter than they did mostly just the fourth quarter. And so that was the only thing that stuck out. But, I got to the stadium on Saturday. I was like, hey, we were just here for the Tennessee game because it was such a late night. And I was like, I don't really want to be here. And Georgia came out, and I don't really want to be here either. But they took care of business, and I think that's that. We will share some things I saw with my boots on the ground for that UMass game. We're going to share that with you in just a minute, but we're going to take our first break here. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingalls.
So, you going to play this week?
You gonna play this week?
You going to play this week?
You gonna play this week?
You going to play this
You
week?
gonna play this week? You gonna play this week?
You going to play this week?
You gonna play this week?
This week. And welcome to the Ingalls Game of the Week as the Warhorses square off against the rival.
He's going in.
He's going in. Go, baby!
Ingalls. We're with you every step of the way.
Happy to have Ingalls with us here on the Beat every week. And we talked about the UMass game and how that went. I got some really interesting shots. We got some injury updates. Also saw some young guys do some things as well. We'll talk about that right now. It's Boots on the Ground. So Boots on the Ground, I get to share some of the video that I shot in the Georgia game. And one of the things I spotted, fourth quarter, you couldn't miss it. Some of those freshmen getting into play. Now Nate Frazier scoring his 3rd touchdown on the day. But it's the guy that comes in and lifts him up I was kind of excited to see. It is the 4-star freshman offensive lineman, Daniel Calhoun, who got in there. And there were still some starting-type guys in there. You see Drew Bobo. He's played a lot with the starters this year. You also had Xavier Truss still in the game. So you had Micah Morris in there, but how about the freshman, Daniel Calhoun, getting to be in the game? That was a good sign of what's to come in the future for Georgia. And how about if he's blocking for Nate Frazier the next couple of years? That's really good. Calhoun came into Georgia at 360. Kirby Smart said all those freshman offensive linemen he got last year, he wanted to see him cut weight. Is at 325 now. And a good sign, he's already running with a second team, Mike.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And some great footage there, Cody, and great observation. I mean, this is the future of Georgia football you're seeing. You hope next year's future, right? You hope there's no more injuries. But that's another element of this. One of the reasons why Georgia's won championships is championship depth, and they play against future NFL guys every day in practice. But you got to get them that sugar. You got to get them on the field. You got to give them that encouragement. Say, hey, you're this close. They got to feel it. They got to know what they're sticking around for, the opportunity they've been fighting for, the opportunity they've been sacrificing for. So really big to see Calhoun out there. Really big that these guys got in. Again, maybe not as much as Kirby would have preferred because of the slower start, but enough. They got enough of a taste of it. And I think that experience, that game day experience, means the next time they go out there, probably not the same amount of jitters.
Yeah, heart rate not as high. The other part of this video that we saw is Nate Frazier hugging all the offensive linemen. Kirby Smart said afterwards, they love blocking for him, and he's such a personable guy. I think that's part of it. When you got a guy back there you want to succeed, that's a really good sign. Now, talking to running backs, we did not see on the field on Saturday, but pregame, wanted to share some video I got because a lot of talk, potentially Georgia could have 6 more games if things go, certain ways. So we may see some of these guys eventually, but great to see Rod Robinson finally suited up in red with those silver breeches on. So got to see him out there. Saw the other Robinson, Branson Robinson. You can see the brace he had on his right knee right there. Both guys went through pregame. Neither made it on the field, but we did get to hear from Kirby Smart a little bit today. I asked him also on Saturday about what's the deal with the Robinson guys? When can we see them out there? Here's the latest from Kirby Smart from his press conference today.
We'll know more today. Branson and Rod both have looked good in the last week in terms of picking up their pace, running, cutting. We're gonna progress them today. They're gonna do more today than they have. They ran. I guess y'all saw them Saturday run. They did more yesterday. We're day by day with those guys, but there's a possibility. So we're excited about them getting back to work.
So it sounds like Branson Robinson obviously much closer than Roderick Robinson, but still encouraging news, especially when considering, you got 2 months. 2 months from now, you're still going to maybe playing. If you make it all the way to the championship, you're going to need some people here as you go through these games.
Yeah, I like the idea of fresh legs. I feel like we're seeing a fresh-legged Smile Munden out there. Veteran linebacker coming back from injury. I think he's been a huge factor. He was all over the field against Tennessee. His leadership is back out there. You mentioned both of these running backs with ETN a little banged up. Frazier can't do it alone. He's going to need some help. Cole a little bit limited back there in terms of what he can offer you in terms of different packages. So this is big, and this is the thing that separates Georgia from other programs. Is they got guys like this coming back. Everybody else is wearing down. I feel like Georgia's getting a boost. They've got to survive this Tech game, and then I think you're going to see a boost in the SEC championship game.
Yeah, obviously maybe tough to get some of these guys. He talked about Dylan Bell today, even gave an injury and update saying he may be good to go. But it's a short week. We got to keep in mind, not as much recovery time for these guys. So may not see them against Georgia Tech, but now the SEC championship now, which is you thought you'd have a couple weeks to kind of recover. You're going to need all hands on deck for that, of course. The other part of Saturday was it was senior day. They kind of moved it up because they didn't want to do it on the Friday night of the Georgia Tech game. So we got senior day, and it got me to thinking, hey, I've seen this before. Tate Ratledge did senior day last year. He's a fifth-year senior, so he did senior day again, and it got me to thinking, see, some of these guys, you see Dylan Fairchild, he was out for senior day. Micah Morris, he was out. These guys are redshirt juniors, so technically 4th years, but they could all be back next year. You go through some of the redshirt juniors who could be doing senior day twice. There's one of them, number 93, Ty Ingram Dawkins, assuming he doesn't go to the NFL, could be back. Micah Morris, Jared Wilson, Dylan Fairchild, Cash Jones, all redshirt juniors. So always interesting to me, Mike, these guys that are doing senior day multiple times.
Yeah, well, they're going to keep their options open. They got agents now. The NIL's got agents for these kids, and they have to look at the draft stock, and that's going to be a conversation for another show, probably sooner than later, because of the way this transfer portal window works and when guys have to declare, I think by, mid-January, first week of January. So these decisions are coming down. The question for Georgia is going to be on the strategy, the NIL strategy. And how much money would you be willing to pay Ty Ingram Dawkins to come back another year versus go to the NFL? I think about guys like Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint and Kendall Milton, guys that did not get drafted. Think about what another year at Georgia would have done for them if they had $250,000 or $500,000 in their pocket to come back for another year at Georgia and perhaps improve their draft stock while making some NIL money. I think that's the preferred method over getting kids out of the other program. Get the kids that you've already got in your program and you know what they can do. Now, obviously, there's going to be some need positions and there's going to be some free agents out there, quarterback, perhaps one of them, most notably. But when you have a chance to re-sign a guy like this and you talk to their agent, hopefully their agent is realistic about it and they don't sell these kids on, oh, you're a second or third rounder, and then they don't get drafted, or they go in the 5th or 6th round and suddenly they're fighting to make a squad instead of coming back to Georgia and improving their draft stock and making money along the way, getting themselves an insurance policy in the event of an injury, which is available to all of them. To me, that's how you solve this, is by keeping a lot of these guys that would go to the NFL as lower round draft picks or free agents, bring them back. Just imagine if Georgia had Dejon Edwards and Kendall Milton still in their backfield, 2 undrafted guys that are trying to fight and scrap and find their way in the NFL, could be part of a national championship roster right now still at Georgia.
Something really interesting, too, if it's Georgia Tech week. Georgia Tech just hired away from the Chicago Bears one of their former salary cap managers. Is that a job, kind of a GM job where he's got to decide who's making what? Seems like it's going to be a position that every team's going to need moving forward, because you can't throw that on top of a head coach as well to figure out how much everybody's making.
Well, I think Georgia's already got a system in place for that, Cody. I think, they got a system where the starters make this much, second string makes this much. And then, of course, these kids are free to negotiate NIL deals outside. Now, one of the things that's changing is that now schools are going to have direct control of NIL funding. So you're going to see the skids greased on that becoming even more of a job, as you would say. It wouldn't surprise me to see Kirby have someone in that position, or realistic, there's probably somebody already in that position that's job is to solely watch over that. We just don't know it, or there's not a title, or they're doing something else also. So I think this is something Georgia's done really well. I think that roster management, I think Kirby Smart is the best in college football at that. Now, that said, I don't think all their free agents have worked out as well as they would like. And when I say free agents, I mean some of the transfers in, but others have. London Humphreys is a guy that maybe not a giant impact this year, although he's had some big plays, but this is a guy that's been tabbed as a future leader in the program. This is a guy that's going to grow into that. I think ETN has a tough decision to make on whether he goes pro or not. If he comes back another year, he'll continue to be the leader in that running back room. I'm not sure what ETN's going to do, but talking to NFL people, he's got a very tough decision to make, largely because he had the slow start to the season and now this injury. I don't think ETN has really shown the NFL what he can do. How much money would he need to stay? I don't know. That may be a negotiation going on right now for all I know. But to your point, what Georgia Tech is hiring is what all these programs have had to do in some way, shape, or form as the college football rules have changed, and we've seen these free agency market and these NIL deals on the side.
Yeah, we kind of came into this talking about senior day. Trevor Etienne, will he have a Georgia senior day next year, as he is a junior on this year's team? All right, that is boots on the ground. It is time now to talk about the SEC and the college football world in general. We'll do that with Mike's 30,000-foot view. And it is that time of year where chaos just kind of reigns supreme, Mike.
Well, I have a confession, Cody. I didn't see this one coming. I like to think of myself as an expert, but I did not see Alabama losing at Oklahoma. I did not see Florida beating Ole Miss, and I did not see Texas A&M falling at Auburn. But I should have known if I would have listened to Kirby. He said all year long how tough it is on the road. He wasn't just saying that. That wasn't just a convenient speech after the Alabama game and after the Ole Miss game. He meant it. In fact, I asked Kirby this question today, and I haven't done the research yet. I will by the end of the week. My apologies. But the top 7 SEC teams that are ranked in the top 25 in the nation are only 13 and 12 in true road games in the SEC. And that speaks volumes. You're talking about a 50% winning percentage for a top 25 team playing on the road in the SEC anywhere. And Kirby shot back, I'd like to know what it was last year, because it's always been tough. But maybe now it's just more into focus. Now, we know that, you know that, I know that, Kirby knows that, the people watching this program know that. I don't know if Ward Manuel and the College Football Playoff Committee recognize that. I've seen some of the Big Ten folks on social media saying, well, that just goes to show you, that the SEC is not that good if their ranked teams are struggling on the road, whereas in the Big Ten, the ranked teams are just bulldozing everybody. Well, you and I know it's because the bottom half of this league is really good. I mean, case in point, Mississippi State, the worst team in the league, doesn't have a conference win all year. They went to Arizona State, only lost by a touchdown. Arizona State's on the verge of making the college football playoff as a Big 12 representative. So, point being, the SEC is that much better. It's that much deeper. Now, will the College Football Playoff Committee reward the SEC for its depth, or will they continue to use those wins and loss records against the SEC? Because that seems to be what they're putting a lot of priority on. Even though the executive director, who's Rich Clark, said at the beginning of this whole spiel, first conference call, that schedule strength would be a major metric because it cross-cuts the conferences. And what do we mean by that? Well, passing stats, offensive stats, those don't really translate. Just because you're the number 2 offense in the Big Ten doesn't mean you'd be the number 2 offense in the SEC, because the league schedule is so much more difficult. So you have to put those numbers into perspective. I say you have to, that maybe the College Football Playoff Committee doesn't agree. When you look at the representation, who those people are and how they view things, college football is very much a regional sport. Even though we see it on national television, people do have regional biases. We've seen that over and over and over. That's why Roy Kramer made the BCS a numbers game, was to take a lot of these sort of opinions out of it, which we're seeing right now play out in the College Football Playoff Committee room. So these rankings this week will be very interesting to see how far down they drop some of these SEC teams that lost conference games versus teams from other conferences that maybe didn't play the same level of competition. Penn State beating Minnesota on the road, for example, as Alabama playing on the road against a tough Oklahoma defense.
Yeah. Is there a way? So I got a couple questions about it. First thing I'll say is, I think this College Football Playoff Committee has already shown they can just read wins and losses, and it's really tough for them to have nuance and take all of that into account. So I will be interested to see where Alabama and Ole Miss fall after all of this goes down. And that said, that's what still, even though Georgia's in the SEC championship, and yes, they control their own destiny, if they were to lose the SEC championship game, can they look past, a couple things scare me. If Alabama and Ole Miss are still with 3 losses, they still have to win out. But if they're like that, they'll say, hey, well, they beat Georgia head-to-head. Right. Because they've already done that and put those teams ahead of him. So that worries me if you lose the SEC championship. You feel like there's a way. Is Georgia locked in because they're in the SEC championship, if they can beat Georgia Tech?
I think it depends on how they play. I think anything short of a blowout, and they should be in 7, 10, 13-point loss. I think they should still be in. But again, as we just talked about, it's going to be pertinent that the College Football Playoff Committee recognizes that those Georgia losses to Alabama and Ole Miss were on the road. And it does make a difference in the SEC, clearly. We've seen that. Georgia also with that very valuable road win at Texas. Another reason why you want Texas to beat A&M. You want Georgia to be able to show on their resume a road win over a top 5 team that Alabama and Ole Miss do not have. So yes, while head-to-head is important, I do think it's a mitigating factor, especially with that statistic I threw out about the top 25 teams being 13-12 on the road. I do think the fact that those were road games should be a mitigating factor. But again, I'm not in that room, and you're right. I think it's fair to question the College Football Playoff Committee. The rankings seem very self-serving. Ward Manuel is just 1 vote, but he is the University of Michigan athletic director, and there are 4 of the top 5 teams from the Big Ten.
So this week, do we see any more chaos on the radar? Tennessee, Vanderbilt. Does Vandy got one more in them? Auburn, obviously coming off a big win now. Can they knock off Alabama? Is there in Mississippi State? You talked about how tough they've played teams. Do you see any more of that brewing this week?
Hard to say, and this is where you measure coaches. Can you keep your team together when you may not have something to play for? And South Carolina, obviously, we should maybe include them into a discussion as a possible 3 loss at large when you look at their circumstance, especially if they were to beat Clemson impressively. How do these coaches handle the locker room? What type of buy-in do they have? These are metrics that you maybe can't quantify, but you can certainly see which teams are staying engaged. This is why you should have 13 experts in there that can evaluate this sort of thing. So to answer your question, I do think Georgia could get in with 3 losses. I do think that what happens around the landscape has a little something to do with it. What we know, Cody, is that the 4 Power 4 conference championship game winners are guaranteed bids, and the highest ranked group of 5 champion has a bid. So there's 5 right there. It'd be great for the SEC and the Big Ten if Notre Dame were to stumble against USC. That would probably put the Irish out. But with 1 loss, Notre Dame is probably also in. So right there, those are 6 spots taken up, and that only leaves 6 at-large bids. This is where we get into Indiana with 1 loss, Penn State with 1 loss, and Ohio State with 1 loss. Well, now there's 3 of them right there. They're probably going to all stay ranked ahead of those 3-loss SEC teams. So now we're really only talking about 3 spots that are up for grabs in the SEC.
If you had to take an Alabama or Ole Miss or a Tennessee and they only got one of those spots, who would you like to see in there?
Well, I think that with 2 losses, I think Tennessee would be the most deserving.
Right.
You know, they did beat Alabama head-to-head, and while I don't necessarily think they're the most impressive of the 3, they've done the most on the field of the 3, and that head-to-head win over Alabama needs to mean something. So I would probably say if Tennessee is a 2-loss team, I think they're in the best position of any of the SEC teams right now, because they don't, as things stand, they don't have to play in the SEC championship game. They only have 2 losses, and I anticipate them being ranked ahead of Alabama and Ole Miss. The SEC championship game winner, we've already talked about that. They have an automatic slot. So there's 2 more at-larges out there, and that's where we come down to the discussion about a potential 3-loss Georgia if they were to lose the SEC championship game, or it could be a Texas. If Georgia wins, a 2-loss Texas team's in. So now then you're down to just 2 spots. So we're talking about Alabama, we're talking about Ole Miss, and we're talking about South Carolina. And, that's a decision the committee has to make. And as you said, there's more football to be played. How impressive does Alabama look against Auburn? How impressive does Ole Miss look against Mississippi State? How does South Carolina fare against Clemson?
Yeah, South Carolina wins. The momentum feels like it's building for them. All of that said, you see Greg Sankey changing anything with the SEC? I mean, hands are kind of tied, I guess, with the contracts, and you got to have that game to make the money. Can anything change with the SEC championship game so we look at it differently moving forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think, one, as you said, we have 1 more year, so nothing's going to change next year. That's the final year of the contract. And then there's discussions about expanding the playoffs. And, Cody, what I think needs to happen is I think there needs to be a stipulation for all these league championship games. I think there should be a rule where if you lose in your league championship game, you do not drop below any of the teams ranked below you. That's what I think. Now, that's not to say that you're automatically going to jump them. If you're A&M, there's, if you lose that game, there's no guarantee you're going to, but you cannot drop below, because that's a penalty for playing an extra game that those other teams didn't have to play. So I think if you add that stipulation, I think that protects the integrity of the game, and I think it rewards teams for going to that game instead of potentially punishing them.
All right, really good stuff there. We'll see if anything changes moving forward on that. But for now, we know Georgia will be playing in it. And if you're going to play in it, you might as well win the thing, right? And get that locked-in spot into the college football playoff. Time for another break here on The Beat. When we come back, it'll be our Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing Who's Hot and Who's Cold segment. Stay with us.
I'm so glad you're here.
Let's take a look.
Anytime can handle all your HVAC and plumbing needs, providing top quality service for a reasonable price.
All fixed now.
Can we call you again?
Yes, anytime.
Any day?
Yes, anytime.
But for the heat?
Yes, anytime.
For the toilet?
Yes, anytime. Anytime you have a problem, just call.
Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing. Large enough to handle your HVAC needs, but small enough to care.
And Mike, Mr. Anytime now. Had him over to your house last week. They take care of business, don't they?
They sure do. I'll tell you what, I'm really proud to have that sponsor. And then after dealing with them in person, even more proud to be able to suggest to anyone that has an issue to call these folks. They are very helpful. They're very quick, and they're very good at their job. So absolutely, Cody, very appreciative of Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing. Hot, red hot, Carson Beck.
Yeah.
I mean, I know he's not perfect, but 4 touchdowns, no turnovers. I mean, no distraction, no sideline shots. Carson Beck has snapped into form at just the right time. We did a poll. We do an AJC SEC Power Poll every week, and I've got 9 representatives from all over the Southeast. And I asked the question, with 2 minutes left, down a touchdown, what SEC quarterback do you want on your sideline? Now, most of them, this was before last week, most of them said Jalen Milroe. There wasn't a question for 24-3. He wouldn't have been the guy. But most of them said Jalen Milroe at that point. Carson Beck was the number 2 answer. And would you believe that Quinn Ewers of Texas was number 3 behind all those guys? And if there were guys on, you would think Jackson Dart wasn't on there, and that absolutely proved correct, by the way. Yeah. And then the Vanderbilt quarterback was the other one. But Carson Beck, already with that respect from the SEC, tells you a lot. I know we see him up close and we see all the warts and we pick him apart from week to week. But from a national perspective, Carson Beck has a ton of momentum, and he looks like the right guy at the right time for the Bulldogs. He's red hot. Obviously, Frazier. The more carries this kid gets, the better he gets. He gets a better feel for the game. He's getting better at his pass protection. He's understanding the playbook better. He's more reactive now. He's not thinking, he's reacting. And those are two guys that you want hot right now. Another guy I think is hot is Smile Munden. I think him coming back to the defense has been huge. I love the leadership. I love the grit. Everything Smile's been through. He's been there in those championship moments. He brings an edge to that defense that I think it was lacking.
Yeah, great to have Smile back. Like you said, maybe a few weeks off there, kept some fresh legs as he goes down the stretch. I will add Oscar Delp is hot, right? Another touchdown this week. Now 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. Certainly helps when Carson Beck can trust that guy over the middle of the field. So maybe that goes hand in hand with Carson getting hot, Oscar getting hot at the same time. So if that's our hot, who's our cold this week, Mike?
Boy, Lane Kiffin cooled off in a big way. For a while there, Lane was the toast of the town, and Florida wanted to hire him. Boy, all those Gator fans, and they're going back to the message boards and deleting all those posts about wanting to hire Lane Kiffin and get rid of Billy Napier, because Billy Napier and the Gators put it on Lane Kiffin, and that was not a fluke. DJ Lagway is the real deal. Probably should have been in my hot category. This guy's got something extra. Georgia fans, don't look too far ahead into the future. This guy's going to be tough to beat. So Ole Miss has cooled off. Jackson Dart, what do you have? 4 picks in the fourth quarter. 2 of them got called back. How many chances did this? I feel bad for this kid. I know he's been a good quarterback. Seems like a good person, but what a tragic ending to his career at Ole Miss to go down the tubes like that with a playoff spot on the line. You don't want to use the word choke, but it was a very disappointing finish for Ole Miss, Jackson Dart, and Lane Kiffin. Very cold program right now.
Would you say cold? Can we say SEC officiating after this week? Get the touchdown called back for Alabama. Now, I will say, and like people have obviously pointed out, you're Alabama, you get that touchdown, you're still down, and your offense still hadn't done anything all day. But they get that touchdown called back. Would you put SEC officiating cold right now?
No, I think that's too much, Cody. I think there's miscalled every week. I mean, we could have said that after the Texas game and some of the calls and things that happened in that game. Every week, when you look at the number of potential calls that they can make, that they can not make, that they can blow, that they can miss, I just think that was a high-profile moment and maybe a little bit more obvious. But remember, I think there was only 1 second when the ball was snapped, and there was a lot of movement. I'm not making excuses for officials. It's their job to get it right. That was a very difficult circumstance, and they're not perfect. There's going to be missed calls in every football game. That one obviously comes into focus because of the scope of that game and the nature of the call. But no, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to jump the officials. I don't think it decided the game, and quite frankly, I don't think it would have affected the outcome.
How are you feeling on field storming now after we see some kind of misfires again on some more field storming? Oklahoma, obviously, and Auburn came onto the field this week.
Probably like you. I think it's really dangerous. I think that this is a time in our society and in our world where it's just too dangerous of a circumstance. I know people love it. I'd say wait till they get the players off the field and the officials off the field. And then if you want to, tear up your stadium's turf and, cost, thousands of dollars in damage and put, yourself at risk, you just as easily do that in the streets, I suppose. But I think you gotta protect the coaches and the players. This is too dangerous. Something's going to go wrong. It's not if, it's when. The penalties aren't severe enough. They need to send a stronger message. They got to protect those players and coaches and officials, Cody.
Yeah, totally.
And cameramen, right? Because you've had your experiences with that too.
I had my stuff duct taped together this week. It was everything was okay for that. All right, huge week here on the Beat. It's Hate Week. We'll see Georgia and Georgia Tech. There's a lot of hate being talked about. It seems like this rivalry is as alive and well as it's been, and maybe it's just because Brent Key, being an alum, we know how much it means to him, but there seems to be a spark here that's been missing the last few years.
Well, he's the guy, and when he was an interim, I was the guy that came out front with a comment and said, Georgia Tech, you got to hire this guy. You're dumb if you don't. This guy's got the fire. He's got the passion. He wore the colors. He coached under Saban. He coached under O'Leary. I mean, they almost messed it up. They were trying to hire the Tulane guy. It would have been a huge mistake. Brent Key is the real deal. This guy is really good. He is their Kirby Smart. Now, I don't know if Tech has got enough steam behind him for Georgia Tech to build a program like Kirby has, but they're awful darn dangerous. And if you don't believe me, you can ask the Miami Hurricanes, or you can ask Kirby Smart, who's looked at the film and said, we got a task on our hands. Kirby is telling his players, this game's going to be physical. It's going to be rough. I'll refer back to my comments at the beginning of the show. That stinger is sharper than it's ever been, and it's Brent Key. This guy's got fire. He knows how to motivate his players. He knows how to lead. He's got Buster Faulkner over there. They got answers. They got coaches. They got motivated players. Very, very dangerous team, and Brent Key is at the heart of it.
It should be a fun Friday night in between the hedges at Sanford Stadium. And yes, Kirby Smart talks about Brent Key in a way different than he talked about the previous two coaches at Georgia Tech, which tells you all you need to know about how he feels like that Georgia Tech.
Well, and I'll add into this. Kirby Smart championed Brent Key and said, this is the guy. Kirby Smart said that. Kirby Smart has been very supportive of Brent Key throughout this entire deal. There is a lot of respect for Brent Key because Kirby lined up across from him. He knows that Key's a player. Key was a captain. Key beat Georgia 3 out of 4 times when he was a Yellow Jacket. Kirby gets it. He understands. He knows what he's up against.
Good stuff there. All right. We'll talk about Georgia Tech, and we will preview the SEC championship game coming up next Monday night on The Beat, presented by Ingles. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you then.